Right. So we've all had those weeks, right? Those weeks where you're just completely wiped, running on fumes, maybe from work, maybe from life, just that classic feeling of burnout.
Yeah, we've all been there.
But, something we're diving into today is that there's actually a specific type of burnout that a lot of autistic individuals experience, and it's, well, it hits differently, especially it seems in the workplace. And, we're not just talking about needing a vacation here. This is a whole other level.
Right.
So we're taking a deep dive into this today. We're looking at this article, Autistic Burnout at Work, why it happens, and it really gets into like what makes this type of burnout unique, what contributes to it, especially, like I said, in the workplace.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not just like feeling a little fried. It's the article talks about it as this total depletion, like physically, emotionally, mentally. It really impacts, every single part of your life. And it's not something that just goes away after a good night's sleep.
Yeah, it's not like you can just hit the reset button, right?
Exactly. And the article really emphasizes that this is something that can be a long time in the making. And, it can take a really long time to recover from. It's not a quick fix kind of thing.
So let's get into it. Let's unpack some of these workplace factors that the article highlights as contributing to this kind of intense burnout. They start with sensory overload, and I think, to some extent we can all relate to this, right? Like, have you ever walked into, I don't know, a super brightly lit store, maybe there's music blaring, and you just immediately feel overwhelmed. It's like, oh, too much.
Exactly. Now amplify that. Think about like a typical office environment, right? With like the constant hum of electronics, those fluorescent lights, maybe the smell of everyone's lunches heating up, all that stuff. And for someone who is really sensitive to sensory input, it's a lot. Like their senses are just on overdrive all day, every day. And, that's got to be exhausting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That kind of constant sensory bombardment would wear anyone down.
Huh.
And speaking of things that can be draining, the article also talks about the pressure to mask or camouflage, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that, everyone thinks about.
Right. And it's huge, It's that constant effort to suppress or hide your natural tendencies, like your stimming behaviors, just to try to fit it.
Yeah.
Imagine having to constantly monitor your every move, every interaction. It's like you're putting on a performance all day, every single day.
It's not even just fitting in. It's like feeling like you have to constantly be on just to like get through the day.
Yeah.
And the article was saying how this pressure to camouflage, it can be especially draining in work environments where maybe there's not a full understanding of neurodiversity.
Absolutely. Because, without that understanding, that acceptance, it can feel almost impossible to be your true self at work.
Yeah.
Which, just adds another layer to that whole burnout equation. And then on top of that, you have the demands of the workplace itself.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, for sure.
We're talking like unrealistic deadlines, constant pressure to perform, very little flexibility. That's a recipe for burnout for anyone, but especially for someone who is already navigating sensory overload and the pressure to mask.
Especially, I would think, for, people who thrive on predictability and routine, which most workplaces aren't exactly known for.
You're telling me. And speaking of, throwing a wrench in the routine, the article also talks about how jarring, unexpected changes can be. Even just small things, like a sudden project change, a surprise meeting, it can be really disruptive for someone who relies on predictability to manage their day.
Totally. Like you're already juggling all these things and then bam, rug pulled out from under you.
Exactly.
And then, we have to factor in the emotional labor involved in all of this too.
Right. That's a big one. It often gets overlooked. The article describes it as like that effort to manage your emotions to meet social expectations.
Yeah.
So, in a workplace that maybe doesn't fully get your needs, it might mean constantly masking your true feelings.
Why? To avoid judgment.
Exactly.
So not only are you dealing with all the sensory stuff, the pressure to conform, the demands of the job itself, but you're also putting on this emotional performance all day long.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that autistic burnout is such a real and pressing issue in so many workplaces.
It really is. And the thing is, it's not always obvious. There's no like giant neon sign that says, hey, this person is experiencing autistic burnout. It requires, a little bit more awareness.
Yeah, it's almost like you need this whole like decoder ring or something. So how can people get better at recognizing when someone might be dealing with this, especially if it's not always super obvious?
Well, you're right. It's really important to be able to spot the signs. And the article actually does lay out a few.
Yeah.
But, it's important to remember that it can look different for everyone, right?
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all checklist or anything.
Of course.
But there are some common threads. For example, that intense fatigue we were talking about, it can manifest as like this bone-deep exhaustion, like even the smallest tasks just feel impossible.
Yeah, it's not just your typical need another cup of coffee, kind of tired.
Right, exactly. And then there's the cognitive side of it too.
Right.
That brain fog, like we were
Yeah.
talking about. It's more than just having an off day. It's like struggling to focus, to remember things, to make even simple decisions.
Wow.
It's like your brain is just stuck in first gear.
Yeah, and I imagine that could really impact someone's work, right? Like their actual job performance. And then that probably just leads to more pressure, more stress, and it just becomes this awful cycle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, while some people might withdraw or kind of become more quiet when they're burnt out, the article also points out that sometimes it can actually manifest as irritability.
Really?
Yeah. And it makes sense when you think about it, because when you're that depleted, it doesn't take much to push you over the edge.
Oh, for sure. And, we always think of burnout as that image of someone like totally withdrawn and isolated. But it sounds like it can look really different for different people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just about recognizing that, everyone copes differently. Some people might withdraw, like you said, wanting to avoid social interaction, even if they normally enjoy it,
Yeah.
because they're just too exhausted to engage.
Right. You just don't have the energy.
And then there are the physical manifestations of burnout too.
Oh, right, because our bodies have a way of letting us know when something's wrong. The article was talking about things like headaches, problems with digestion, muscle tension, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And those are the kinds of things that, it can be easy to just dismiss them as like, oh, everyday aches and pains, whatever.
Right.
But when they're chronic and they just don't go away, it's often a sign that there's something more going on.
It's like our bodies are waving a giant red flag and we're just like too busy to even notice.
Yeah. And of course, there's the classic burnout symptom,
Mm.
losing interest in things that you used to enjoy.
Ugh, yeah. I think we can all relate to that one.
Exactly. It's like when you're just completely drained, it's almost impossible to muster up the energy to, do the things you love. And what's tricky about that is that it can be easily misinterpreted by others, right? Like as laziness or apathy, when in reality, it's a sign that this person is really struggling.
It's like your energy reserves are completely depleted. So, okay, we've talked about like the why behind autistic burnout, especially at work, and we've talked about some of the ways it can show up. But what can actually be done about it? The article doesn't just leave us hanging, I hope.
No, not at all. It actually offers some, I think, really practical and really hopeful strategies for actually creating a more supportive workplace.
Okay, good.
And the best part is these aren't like these big pie-in-the-sky ideas, They're actionable steps that individuals and even organizations can take.
Okay, so let's dive into them because I think we could all use a little dose of hope right now.
Okay.
Okay, so let's dive into them because I think we could all use a little dose of hope right now.
Okay. So the article really stresses open communication. And I feel like that's, the foundation for everything else. Like it's about creating a workplace culture where employees, they feel safe, supported in actually discussing their needs with their employers.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's not just about speaking up. It's about employers like actively seeking out feedback,
Right.
being proactive in finding solutions.
So it's moving away from that my door is always open thing.
Yes.
To something that's a little more like proactive, empathetic.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like?
Well, I mean, it could be as simple as just regularly checking in with employees.
Yeah.
Not just about like their workload and stuff, but about how are you feeling? What kind of support do you need? And creating like maybe some channels for anonymous feedback,
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
especially for people who might not, feel comfortable actually like directly saying, hey, I need this.
Yeah, you want to make it safe for people to be honest about their needs.
Exactly. And then when you have that foundation of open communication, it's like it makes it so much easier to actually implement accommodations that can make a real difference.
And that's where we talk about things like flexible work hours, maybe the option to work remotely sometimes, quiet workspaces, stuff like that, right?
Exactly. But again, it's not like a one-size-fits-all, right? What works for one person might not work for another, which is why that whole open dialogue thing is so important, because then employers can actually tailor those accommodations to the individual. So for example, maybe someone who has a lot of sensory sensitivities, they might really benefit from, I don't know, like noise-canceling headphones or being able to adjust the lighting at their desk, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Just recognizing that even small adjustments can make a world of difference in someone's ability to actually thrive in that work environment. It
Yeah.
seems like, just awareness and education are so key in all of this.
100%. The article talks about promoting understanding and training on, a larger scale. It's about going beyond just checking a box
Hmm.
and actually educating the workplace about neurodiversity,
Right.
the challenges, the strengths.
The whole picture.
Yeah,
So it's less that's different and more like, how can we make this work for everyone?
exactly. And it's not just about the big picture stuff. Sometimes it's about encouraging those smaller everyday acts of support, like
Huh.
just encouraging breaks, encouraging
Yeah.
downtime.
Yeah. Because we all need that. We all need a break.
Right. Building a culture where it's actually okay to step away, recharge, and come back refreshed. And that's crucial for everyone, by the way.
It's true.
It's about shifting away from that, glory in the grind mentality.
Yeah. No more bragging about who worked the longest hours and who pulled the all-nighter and all that.
Exactly. It's about actually prioritizing well-being and recognizing that rest, it's not a luxury, it's essential.
Rest is a necessity, yes. Okay, so we've got open communication, accommodations, education, breaks. What else?
So the last thing that the article really emphasizes is fostering a supportive community. And this is about going beyond just the employer-employee relationship.
Yeah.
It's about coworkers supporting each other.
So creating that sense of belonging and understanding within the workplace itself?
Exactly. So, that might look like peer support groups, mentorship programs, or even just creating a space where people feel comfortable actually talking about their experiences without being judged.
Totally. It's
Right.
like building each other up, not burning each other out.
Yes. It's about creating that safety net,
Yeah.
that camaraderie.
That reminder that you're not alone in this. Wow. This has been incredible. I feel like we went from what is autistic burnout to how can we make workplaces better for absolutely everyone?
Yeah, totally. Shifting that whole conversation.
So, for someone who's listening and maybe they're thinking, okay, this is all great, but where do I even begin? What would you say is the most important takeaway from this whole conversation?
Ooh, that's a good question. If there's one thing that I hope listeners take away from this, it's that we all have a role to play in creating more inclusive and supportive environments.
Yes, 100%.
Whether you're, an employer, an employee, a coworker, a friend, just, a little understanding, a little empathy goes such a long way.
It really, really does. It's about recognizing that we all have different needs, different experiences, and that's more than okay. That's what makes the world interesting. And it's about fostering that culture of empathy and support, not just in the workplace, but everywhere.
100%.
Yeah.
Approaching each other with curiosity,
Yeah.
not judgment, right? A willingness to actually listen and learn from each other's experiences.
I love that. So the next time, you hear someone say, ugh, I'm so burnt out, take a second to really listen. You might be surprised at what you learn. You might even be able to offer some genuinely helpful support. And until next time, everyone, keep diving deep.